Hi, this is Sergeant Betsy Brandner Smith at the National Police Association, and this is the National Police Association podcast. I have a guest with me today who is the true picture of resilience, but it really goes way beyond that. This is a guy who really for decades has been serving, but he's also been inspiring. And I just thought that you needed to hear his story. Deputy Matt Swartz, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's get right into it. First of all, I got to ask you, because I ask every cop I talk to this question. Why'd you become a cop?
It's one of those questions I've been asked in the past, and of course I've answered it in the past, but I grew up around it. Both of my parents were police officers. So to say that it was meant to be or it was my destiny, through high school, you would have never believed it because I had grown my hair long and I wanted to be a rock star. And I wasn't really a problem child, but I was definitely given the rope to hang myself with plenty of times by mom and dad. And we used to laugh because as kids, we would be out doing something, tearing up the neighborhood or whatever, and all the kids would be like, "Oh my God, the cops," and take off. And dad always knew where to find me because he would just come home and I couldn't get away with much of anything. Um, but that being said, as I grew up, I just kind of followed that path and wanted to serve and wanted to be part of fighting the good fight, so to speak, and leading the charge and being part of the law enforcement family. And I basically kind of stepped up, not necessarily in dad's footsteps, but alongside of him because he was actually still working when I got started. So there was a few days that we interacted a little bit. And of course, dad a couple times had to pull me aside and have the veteran to rookie talk. And he even told me, he's like, "I'm not talking to you father and son. I'm talking to you as a senior man. You should think about this, try that," and just kind of helping me out as I got started.
So on into your police career, you got involved in a crash off duty that really changed the trajectory of your whole life, certainly, and certainly your whole police career. Talk about that.
Yeah, I was years into my career, so I had already been experienced with, you know, like a lot of the guys, while you're working, you're experienced death and crime and some of the worst times for people's lives and some of the best. Uh, so I was an experienced officer, but the one morning I was actually off duty. I was on my way down to a property that I was in the process of building a house on, and I was involved in a crash, and it was off duty. It was November 8th, 2004 at 7:34 in the morning. A kid not paying attention, and he hit my pickup truck in the side and basically T-boned me and flipped the truck and caused it to roll 4 times. And during that, of course, I sustained some pretty serious injuries and literally in a split second without even realizing it happened because I was unconscious and life changed for me.
So when you woke up in the hospital, and when did you start to realize that things were going to change?
It was a couple weeks after the crash. Initially, of course, I had traumatic brain injury and skull was fractured, numerous broken bones, and they actually called for a helicopter to come and take me into the hospital. And in all my years, I was familiar with hospitals and I knew what the ICU was, the intensive care unit. I never knew what a special care unit was until after the fact when they told me that I was so serious. They brought me to one of the high level trauma centers in the area by helicopter, and they went right past the intensive care unit and brought me to that special care unit where they had me hooked up to life support and the breathing machine and all the different tubes. That being said, I was basically just a body laying in the bed for days and days while everybody else gathered around at the hospital and tried to be there for me and be there with me and just hoping and praying that I was going to wake up. And eventually I did, but of course I wasn't there. My body was awake, so to speak, and I could move, but I couldn't really think. I couldn't talk and couldn't necessarily communicate. And it wasn't until a 2 or 3 weeks later, when I got sent to a brain injury hospital for a recovery period, and I actually fell out of bed. And that was like the first thing that I remembered. So, in other words, like that was me. I remembered falling and I remember thinking something is seriously wrong. Now, what do I do? And I laid there on the floor, and it was actually a nurse walking by the room, and the door was open, and she saw me laying on the floor and came in and helped me back into bed. And that's when things started to kind of sink in, so to speak, that I could start to understand what was going on.
How serious were your injuries?
Well, I wound up with um, the traumatic brain injury, and in such, I had injury to the front of my head. So I lost my sense of smell. My vision had gone to 2400. I was basically blind. Um, and one of the ears ringing. Of course, the brain swelled quite a bit. But I also had a lot of damage to one of my arms with a broken elbow. And then my left leg, the ankle had gotten crushed. And as it turned out, that got to be one of the major parts of the problem as well as my story and my life. They couldn't restore the blood flow. Uh, but initially they couldn't stabilize me when they brought me into the hospital. And they were concentrating on the brain injury and my injuries to my head. And after a short time when they couldn't get me to stabilize, they checked the arm and they said, well, that's nothing to worry about. Let's check the foot. And when they did, it was not an open fracture. It was like a closed fracture. I forgot what you call them. So when the ankle broke, it actually shredded the tibial artery, and I was basically bleeding out. But because it wasn't opened up, I wasn't losing blood, and the blood and the swelling had slowed it down, but my pressure didn't stabilize. So I was basically slowly bleeding out because of the swelling. And that being said, when they cut it open, the surgeons were like, "Oh, we found the problem," and blood everywhere. And with that, they closed up a couple of the arteries, got me to stabilize, and then started trying to do the orthopedic repair. And at that point, they told the family, as well as my coworkers and my bosses, other people that had come to the hospital. So with that, the doctors explained that they had fused the foot together, but it just didn't work out. And after a couple weeks, they ultimately, I got gangrene and they had to amputate the left foot. So I became a left leg below knee amputee, and didn't realize it.
So here you are, you're trying to rehabilitate from this horrific crash. You've got a TBI. Now you're an amputee. And are you thinking, I got to get back in a patrol car?
Yes, I wanted to get back to life, back to normal, so to speak. And of course, initially the challenge was just absolutely monumental because I had to learn how to walk, I had to learn how to stand, run, much less, how to be a cop still. But as things started to improve, it was kind of like that learning curve. I was here and it got a little better, a little better, a little better, a little better, and then things were going very well. And eventually I got to the point where I was running different 5K races and downhill skiing. I lived in upstate New York. We had the winter was there and I went skiing and I was getting into everything and I was doing pretty well with it. And then eventually made it back to work. Wasn't easy, but I did make it back.
Now your crash was at a time when prosthetic technology was good, but not as good as it is now. Did you have, so once you decided, hey, I'm going to go back to being a cop, did you work with physical therapists, physicians? What did you do to
Yes.
get a prosthetic that would
The,
allow you to chase bad guys and fight with bad guys and things like
it was
that.
a catch-22 because the technology was there, but private health insurance wouldn't pay for it. If I was Wounded Warrior Project, those guys were getting 4, 5, 6 legs for different events and everything else, and I got one, and I had to have it do everything. So it was definitely a challenge for me. But while I was home trying to recover, I actually found other police officers that had prosthetic legs. And I started making phone calls and I got in touch with a few of these guys. And then things really started to look up for me, and the encouragement from the guys, as well as some of the behind the scenes, like how to get a pair of combat boots on with a prosthetic leg. You got to have side zip boots, the little things like that that the guys would tell me, and little stories of their uh, triumphs and tribulations being a cop and working with a prosthetic.
Did you go back to the same agency?
Yes. Yes, I was a trooper for the New York State Police, and we didn't have light duty at the time. So while I was out, I was sick, and the guys were donating vacation time for me to kind of stay on the books with a paycheck coming in while I healed up. And that being said, it meant the world to me to be able to go back early. I had enough leave. I could have stayed out for a year and a half. That leave was already on the books donated for me, and I actually went back 11 months after the crash. So I was able to, not use everybody's leave and go back early, so to speak, as soon as I possibly could.
Now you became, because I remember when you went back to work, I was on the job. You were pretty well known in the profession and extraordinarily inspiring, not just to other cops, but to kids and to military veterans who were coming back and wanted to get into law enforcement. And so you started going out and sharing your story a little bit at a time, didn't you?
Yeah. And and that's what I told a lot of people. I never set out to be that inspirational or motivation. I just fought like heck to keep my job and do what fight the good fight. And part of what I would tell everybody, a badge doesn't make you a cop. A police card doesn't make you a cop. A gun doesn't make you a cop. They're just tools to help you do your job. And I just have an extra tool. I got a left leg to go along with my badge and my gun and my patrol car, and it makes it easier to do my job. I could still arrest somebody without that leg. It would be a little bit awkward, but that will to fight the good fight and do the right thing and be part of the blue line and be strong and all that. It just that's kind of in that core, so to speak, and it's hard to step away from it, even after getting plenty enough time in, and I retired from the New York State Police and moved south, and now here I am still in law enforcement working for the Clay County Sheriff's Department in Florida, and still doing, although it is a little bit tougher. I'm definitely older than when I started, but I go to the gym and I still try to stay in shape and do stuff with my leg, and still exercise, of course, and try to stay strong enough to hold the line.
And I want you to talk about that because physical fitness is it's very important to law enforcement, right? But everybody sees, fat cops out there and this and that. When you're wearing a prosthetic and when you're a state trooper as well, because you're mostly by yourself, right? How tell
Yes.
people how important fitness is.
Well, I really believe that I was not like a bodybuilder or anything. I was in good shape and I was younger, but I was in decent shape. I was active, and every year we did our PT test, and I always did decent. And I would go to the gym and work out. Also, I lived in farm country, so I was always out working with the animals and doing some physical labor, whether it's building fences or whatever the case. And when that life-changing moment happened, the fact that I was in decent physical condition really helped, and it helped the recovery, and knowing what to do in the gym and how to exercise, and it just that kind of set the tone. If anything, it made it more prominent, because once I did start going back to the gym and working out, I was it was just more natural for me to be in and working and working out and that.
Now you're I guess we'd call you an extremely lucky guy. I think we'd also kind of call you in some cases an unlucky guy because you're that lightning strikes twice guy. Talk about your second crash.
Yeah, so after the first crash, I went back to work and I finished out my time and I retired under my own circumstances. I got my years in and I retired. And then I took another job in the South and I was actually on my way to work and I got hit again. This time it was head on, but that crash actually was worse than the first one orthopedically. And the second one, I was actually pinned in the car and they had to use the jaws of life to try to get the dash off of me and get me out of the car. But I wound up on the same. This became like that saying, add that insult to injury. So already being an amputee on the left side and a broken elbow and the skull fractures and all that, and I made it back. I recovered, and then I got hit again, and it was basically that same, not quite the same direction, but on the same side, and I wound up with a broken femur and broken hip bone all on that same side of already being an amputee, and then broken left arm. So I got plates in my arm, my hip got pinned together. They put a rod in the femur and then basically healed me up and put the prosthetic back on. There you go. There you go. Try it again. And same thing, I had to go through physical therapy and try to figure this all out and get healed up and back to work. And that time actually it was only 6 months and I went back to work after 6 months. But yeah, it's been interesting. The guys, of course, have always been full of humor. And the guys, when I went back to work, they're like, I'm not riding with you. Maybe you should just stay at work from home. Or one of the guys said, maybe you should just get like an armored truck and drive to work in an armored truck, all the jokes. And even after the first crash, the state troopers that I worked with would joke about it. And one of the first ones, and he was a joker anyways, but he came up to the house to check on me and he said, Hey, we've been thinking about it and you're going to have a really, really hard time coming back to work. And I said, yeah, I know I'm struggling. He goes, no, you're going to have a tough time in court. I said, what do you mean? And he said, you were always known for good court cases and good arrests and your paperwork was up, but now you're not going to do very well in court. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, yeah, no matter how good your court cases are, you're still not going to have a leg to stand on. Ha, 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 ha. So, and that was, when it started. Next thing you know, the jokes, the guys coming up with creative ways to crack jokes about being one-legged. And of course, if I couldn't go back to work, they said, you can always get a job at the IHOP. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's real funny, guy.
The cops think this stuff's
Yeah.
hysterical.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the cops were like, the guys were like, once we knew you were going to live, we just had to laugh about it. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, guys. Now, you didn't just, rehabilitate again, come back to work, all that stuff. A lot of what you did, you ran competitively. You ended up at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, FLETC, as an instructor.
Yes.
Firearms tactics, all that. How did that happen?
It was planned. I had applied, was planning for a potential second retirement, so to speak, and it was in my wheelhouse, so to speak, doing the instructor thing because I was also an instructor for the New York State Police as a firearms instructor. So when I went to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, I actually went in as a firearms instructor. And my health, of course, I was doing good with state police. We didn't have light duty, so it was all or nothing. So I was kind of that mentality right from the beginning, like it's all for me because it's not going to be nothing. I've got to run. I've got to do better than the other guys because everybody's going to look at me a little bit more critical. And that being said, when I went to FLETC as an instructor, I've prided myself as being an experienced veteran retired officer, and I'm trying to show the guys something to follow in my footsteps, so to speak. So when I would teach stuff and demonstrate stuff, I would, take a kneeling position, take a prone position, run, do, and some of my classes, I would even do push-ups with the class leader if the guys screwed up, and I would put challenges out for, like a little shooting competition. If you guys can hit this thing a certain number, I'll do a push-up for every time that you hit the steel plate, or, just different things like that, which is important for camaraderie, important for leadership, but also important to, show the guys like, hey, this is what it's this important to be physically fit.
Now you're married to a undoubtedly a really strong woman, and you credit that support from family, that supportive camaraderie, including the jokes from your coworkers, to helping you continue on this life of service and resilience. Talk about family support for your average law enforcement officer. How important is that?
It's critical. And it's something, especially when you're a young officer, you're so into that mindset of move forward, push forward. I got to do this. I got to, and it's law enforcement. We eat, sleep, and breathe. And a lot of times guys will drift away from the family. They're not quite as important because work is more important, or you're busier, spending more time, more hours in the patrol car than you are at home. And I was the same way. I was busy. I had a lot going on. But when the crash happened, luckily I wasn't that far removed from my family was important. My friends were important. So I did have that support network, so to speak, and the family really stepped in to be there for me. And I didn't forget that. And that was one of the things that it kind of brought me back to that place when I was doing the recovery, that place of, reminding me that the family is important, and thank God I have them. And that being said, when I did start doing some of my speeches to different police academies and different places that were having me come in to tell my story, that was kind of my strength in my story, was that it's the normal, it's the everyday. I wasn't a SWAT officer that was shot down in a blaze of glory. I wasn't, stopping a bank robbery or breaking up a gang. It was just a stupid off-duty crash. And that being said, I'm not like the gifted public speaker. Heck, I'm half bald. I've got this low monotone voice. But that was like the strength of my story, was to tell everybody, like, I am one of you guys. I am not the perfect speaker up front. And I'm not, the SWAT officer full of muscles. I am about as normal as you can get. And if you look to the officer on your right and the officer on your left, the odds are one of those might not be here in the next 4 years, because we're losing more cops in car crashes than we are in gunfire. And that, like I said, that was kind of the importance of my story, that I am the same. I am one of you guys. And if it wasn't for my support network of family and friends and co-workers, but especially the family, things would have been a lot tougher for me.
How frustrating was it in 2020 and 2021, after you had worked so hard to stay on the job as a police officer, to see our profession just so demonized and vilified in the media and by politicians? What was that like for you?
It was tough. I was somewhat removed from that, being an instructor. I wasn't out working patrol at the time. So I hated seeing it. Boy, and a lot of people that knew me and knew I was a police officer, they would ask, why don't cops do this? Why are cops like that? And I would have to kind of put myself in check, because I didn't want to get into arguments with people. Well, I wanted to, but I didn't. Um, but that actually was a catalyst for changes in what I did with my career. Um, when the whole world said that cops are, they need to de-escalate and they're using force too much and all, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center actually took that challenge up and got congressional money to put together a use of force and de-escalation program and start traveling around teaching it to different local law enforcement throughout the country. And I was able to be a part of that. And backside, while I was traveling around teaching this class, I continued telling my story and would share my story at different police academies in different states, and just kind of continuing to spread that inspiration, so to speak. And that wasn't really my purpose. It was just sharing my story. But that really was a special time for me. That being said, I was traveling so much that I was constantly away from my girlfriend at the time. So one thing leads to another. I decided to jump ship from Federal Law Enforcement Training Center and stop traveling, and I wound up applying with the sheriff's office where we were living at the time. And, like I said, basically kind of clipped my wings and stopped traveling. And now I'm back to working patrol, and I'm an instructor for the sheriff's office here. And then we did get married, and things are going well for us.
Well, I tell you what, you really are. You're so humble, but you're so inspiring, and you really are the picture of resilience. And I'm so glad you got to share your story with us. And we thank you for spending some of your time today with us. And if you'd like more information about the National Police Association, visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Every day, the brave men and women of law enforcement put their lives on the line to keep us safe. But they need our help to continue their mission. Activist politicians, progressive prosecutors, the ACLU, and the rest of the anti-police forces receive millions in donations from extremist pro-criminal elements like George Soros and woke corporations. The National Police Association is fighting them in courts around the country, including the United States Supreme Court, defending officers who are being attacked for doing their jobs. Additionally, the National Police Association works year-round to pass tough-on-crime legislation to put and keep criminals behind bars. Consider going to nationalpolice.org and donating to keep us in the fight. Together we can win. That is nationalpolice.org.